Welcome to On the Money Line, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsom, and I'm here to break down this weekend's event. It's UFC 275. We've got two title fights with the main event, the co-main event, the men's light heavyweight championship and the women's flyweight championship as well. But just before we get into those breakdowns, as always, we have a Baze AI recap from last weekend at UFC Vegas 56, which will be on our YouTube channel in the Baze AI playlist. Definitely don't miss that one this week. The Baze AI did amazing last week. The UFC prediction software hit a 71% accuracy on the straight pick, so make sure you check that out. But straight into the breakdowns, that's why you're all here. We've got UFC 275 and we start in the main event for the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship, Glover Teixeira versus Jiri Prochazka. Now, for me, this fight, pre-tape, I was all over Prochazka. I thought it was going to be a really difficult fight for Glover. The fairy tale's going to be over. But actually, after watching tape, I'm flipping back over to the other side with Glover Teixeira. And I think that this fight, it's important where the biggest gap in skill is, because Jiri Prochazka, the big danger for him, he's got that crazy movement, that crazy striking angle, the angles he takes when he comes in, striking aggressively, moving his opponent backwards is really awkward to deal with. He has that hands down style as well, where he solely relies on head movement, which is actually a negative, and that's something that I don't like about his style. So with the power that he possesses as well, there is dangers in this fight for Glover Teixeira for sure. Like if Prochazka comes into this fight and flatlines Glover, then I'm not going to be surprised, and I don't think anybody should be surprised. But for how dangerous this is for Glover Teixeira, there's a legitimate argument that this is even more dangerous for Prochazka, because the biggest gap in skill, in my opinion, is within the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, within the grappling, and that's where Glover Teixeira absolutely shines. Glover Teixeira is on a 6-fight win streak as well, which just can't be ignored at this point. His last 3 fights, he's been an underdog and won all those 3 fights. The 3 fights prior to that, he was a pick'em and won all those 3 fights as well. So the reason Glover Teixeira is doing well is because of this topside grappling, because of the jiu-jitsu. And his wrestling game's decent as well. He's got good traditional style wrestling takedowns with the double legs, the single legs, but then he's also got decent chain wrestling as well against the cage. He's got the old man strength to make sure his opponents are suffocating against the cage a little bit, draining the gas tank. But more importantly, whilst he's being patient against the cage, chain wrestling and looking for the next best opportunity to take his opponents down, he's also putting himself out of that knockout threat danger, which is obviously in the open space. So I think that Glover Teixeira is going to be able to get takedowns in this fight, and that's the big question. You have to ask yourself that question. Can Glover get this fight to the mat? I think he can, and he might only need 1 takedown to win this fight via submission or ground and pound. Jiri Prochazka, he has got good get-ups, but they tend to be explosive get-ups using physical strength and power opposed to good technique, which if he does get up, it's only going to drain his gas tank. But I think that Glover could even produce multiple takedowns in this fight if the first one isn't enough. I think that Prochazka, he might have to change his style of fighting in regards to being a little bit more cautious. And if he does start to fight a little bit with a little bit of hesitancy on his side, then that's not the fighter that Prochazka was, and that's not the fighter that Prochazka has got him to this title fight in this spot. I think that Glover Teixeira is going to be able to change some of that. I think he is going to be able to get the takedowns. I think the fairy tale continues here for the 42-year-old veteran in Glover Teixeira, and still the UFC light heavyweight champion. And in the co-main event, in the women's flyweight championship fight, we've got Valentina Shevchenko versus Taila Santos. Now, this is an interesting fight because Taila Santos is a fighter that has surged up to the top. She's not one of the fighters in sort of that top 5-10 that we've been talking about for a while, that's sort of rotating a little bit and fighting Shevchenko and just giving Shevchenko fights. I feel like Taila Santos has got a bit of an edge to her. I think she's a little bit different from previous fighters. She's definitely aggressive on the feet. She's got a Muay Thai style of striking. She'll come forwards. She'll methodically come forwards, though. Like I say, she's got that typical Muay Thai stance. But as she's coming forward, like I say, she's dangerous. She can put combinations together. She's a reactive striker as well. And that's what's going to be interesting with Shevchenko, because if Taila Santos really does start reactively striking really well against Shevchenko, then Shevchenko is going to have to consider what she's going to be doing next and how to make those sort of adjustments. And Taila Santos has got a decent ground game as well. When she's taken down and she's on bottom, that's where she can get a little bit stuck. But on on top side offensively. I think that Taila Santos has got a decent BJJ game, and she can do good work on the mat. So she's a well-rounded fighter with that Muay Thai stance and style. And I have said this with Amanda Nunes. I said it for quite a while, that at some point that fighter is going to lose. I said with Amanda Nunes, at some point Amanda Nunes is going to lose a fight. She's going to lose a fight as a big -1,000 favourite. And it's just natural, it happens. This is MMA, and unless your name's Khabib Nurmagomedov, you're not going to finish your career unbeaten. So Valentina Shevchenko is going to lose another fight. I said that with Amanda Nunes. I didn't think Nunes was going to lose to Pena, admittedly. But the same applies here with Shevchenko. She is going to lose at some point. And again, I'm just not quite sure it's going to be Taila Santos right now in this spot. I think Santos is going to be competitive, and potentially more competitive, or provide a more competitive fight than Shevchenko's had over her last few fights. But I do think that Shevchenko does have the slightly better striking. Potentially, there could be a bigger gap than slightly, But she does have the better striking. I think the wrestling's going to be there for Shevchenko if she needs it. And Taila Santos, for as good as she is, she does have those flaws and those holes in the game grappling defensively. With Valentina Shevchenko on top using the offensive grappling, I think that's a big gap in skill as well. So I think Taila Santos is going to be competitive. I don't think it's going to be a complete whitewash, but I do think that Valentina Shevchenko is just going to be too much, too soon right now for Taila Santos. So, and still the women's flyweight champion, I'm picking Valentina Shevchenko to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a rematch from the fight of the year a few years ago. We've got Weili Zhang versus Joanna Jedrzejczyk. The only disappointing thing about this fight is the fact that it's not 5 rounds again. We've got 3 rounds this time. What made it a phenomenal fight last time is because it was a war for 25 minutes. I think we're going to see another war here, but like I said, the unfortunate thing is it's only going to be for 15 minutes and not 25. But I like Weili Zhang in this fight. I think that Zhang, last time out, I think she did rightly win the fight, but it was very, very close. Obviously, the betting side was Jedrzejczyk last time out. I bet Weili Zhang, so I've got no problem saying that. I do think it was a close enough fight for Joanna Jedrzejczyk to hold that value. But in this fight, 3 rounds, I like the changes that Weili Zhang's made here as well. From a training camp perspective, since the last fight with Jedrzejczyk, she's now over at Fight Ready with Coach Eddie Char and Coach Henry Cejudo. And we know what happens when Coach Henry Cejudo's in your corner. More often than not, his fighter wins a fight. So she's got a good team around her. She's also been training at Bang Tao Muay Thai as well, which is the new gym from the Hickman brothers that have gone from Tiger Muay Thai. So she's got some really, really good looks in for this fight coming up. She's had a good camp. She's going to have a good team in her corner. And I do think that she's a better fighter than what we saw in the last fight against Joanna Jedrzejczyk. Whereas for Joanna Jedrzejczyk, she's not been as active as Weili Zhang. She's coming back here. She could maybe be off a step or two. That's a potential outcome. But if she's not, like I said, I still think it's going to be a war. But I still think that Weili Zhang is not only the slightly better striker, but I think that she's got the wrestling and the top side jiu-jitsu on her side. And like I said, I think that she's going to have made those improvements. I think she's going to be a developed fighter from the last time Joanna Jedrzejczyk fought her. And I feel that although this is a war, I think it's going to be a more clear decision. I'm picking Weili Zhang to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Rogerio Bontorin versus Manel Kape. Now, it's going to feel like I've got something against Manel Kape, and I promise you I haven't. I just feel that a lot of these fights that he's getting in the UFC are just stylistically not amazing for him. Now, with Rogerio Bontorin, I was watching his fight with Brandon Royval. Now, granted, Brandon Royval's takedown defense is a little bit sketchy. I think that's partly because Royval doesn't mind being taken down because he's a legitimate BJJ black belt himself. But when you really read between the lines, so to speak, in that fight, Rogerio Bontorin was getting good takedowns. He was getting body lock takedowns where the slams were actually not even giving Royval a chance to defend the takedown. So you can't even say, oh, well, Royval accepted that takedown or he didn't defend it properly. He just wasn't given any chance. Rogerio Bontorin was just getting the body locks and then whipping him down to the mat. And that's really good takedown offense from Bontorin. And Bontorin's got decent takedown offense. He's got a variety of different takedowns. He will shoot traditional wrestling style takedowns as well. But what I like about Bontorin is he was able to really stifle Brandon Royval on the mat. Brandon Royval was throwing offensive submissions up at Bontorin. Bontorin knew what was happening. He was calm, he was composed, he was getting good topside control. I actually thought Bontorin won that fight as well. I think that Brandon Royval, it was close enough that there's no controversy there, but I did think that Bontorin beat Royval. But Bontorin's topside control, his ability to get fights down to the mat, and the fact that he's a decent striker as well with good power, I think that puts him in good stead in this fight against Manel Kape. Now, he's got to be careful because Manel Kape is going to be the better striker. He is probably going to be the slighter, faster striker. And from a power perspective, I actually don't think that Kape holds more power than Bontorin. I just think Kape's accuracy and how clean and crisp he strikes is probably going to be where the issues are for Bontorin if he's going to lose this fight. But outside of Bontorin getting caught and knocked out, I just don't think Bontorin's going to strike for too long with Kape, even if Kape, really starts to pull combinations together and starts to put it on Bontorin. That's just going to only make Bontorin think, I need to get this fight to the mat. And once Bontorin starts getting takedowns, I think he can settle Kape on his back. We've seen Kape have troubles off his back before. We've seen him settled off his back. I think Bontorin's got good topside pressure where he can maintain control topside and either find a submission or take that round due to the amount of time that he's run down on the clock by staying in those topside positions. He's got a good rear naked choke. He tends to find the back quite well as well. I think there's enough upside here for Bontorin to, be able to have a good chance of winning this fight. And like I said, outside of Kape landing that hard punch or that hard combination that Bontorin gets knocked out with, I think Bontorin is going to be winning rounds here. I think he's going to be able to cause problems for Kape stylistically. So I'm actually siding with the underdog and I'm picking Rogerio Bontorin to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the prospect that everybody is talking about. Here's my fighter to watch at MMA Play 365, the last time he fought with his UFC debut. We've got Della Maddalena versus Ramazan Emeev. This is an interesting fight. The UFC are not messing about with the progression and the hype with Della Maddalena. They want to know right now how good this kid is. And it is a very interesting fight. I think the betting line has just sailed a little bit too much though on Della Maddalena. I think that if you are wanting to play Maddalena just to find out where he's at, I think that that's not a betting line that you can be playing to, find out how good he is. Obviously, if he was a plus money underdog, that's the sort of line in this spot where you think, you know what, I'm going to find out, I'm going to pay to find out how good Della Maddalena is, and we'll see how that plays out. As a plus money underdog, I'd completely get that. But as a moderate favourite, I don't agree with it. I think that Ramazan Emeev, his striking is a little bit underrated. Like, you go back and watch that Danny Roberts fight, a fight, by the way, I thought that Emeev won. Again, a little bit of controversy. I wouldn't call it a robbery, but definitely controversy for sure. I think that Ramazan Emeev's striking is a little underrated. He dealt with Danny Roberts, in my opinion, quite well. He was up on strikes against Roberts, and Roberts is known for his striking. But then Emeev's got a really quick single leg takedown now. Della Maddalena defends takedowns quite well. His scrambling's really good as well. But the thing is with Emeev, if he's shooting those same takedowns as he shot against Danny Roberts, those real fast entries into the single leg takedown, Della Maddalena isn't going to have a good chance to scramble and get back up to his feet instantly. He's going to have to work back up to his feet methodically. And that's where we don't really know where Maddalena's game's at. I think Ramazan Emeev, from a striking perspective, if this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, Della Maddalena's going to likely piece him up across 3 rounds. I'd be quite confident in saying that. But this is a mixed martial arts fight, and with Emeev mixing in takedowns, if he gets a couple of takedowns in the first round and steals that first round from Della Maddalena, you've got no idea how Della Maddalena is going to cope with that. He might become a little bit hesitant striking himself because he's worried about getting taken down again and losing another round. Emeev's difficult to finish as well. Even accumulation of volume is a tough Russian. So I think that actually Ramazan Emeev, it's going to be difficult for him here, and he's going to absolutely need takedowns, but he's the more experienced fighter. He's fought the better level of competition, and I think he's got a style. If Della Maddalena is going to be beaten at this level in the UFC, then it's the style of a fighter like Ramazan Emeev, a solid Russian, that is going to be able to beat Della Maddalena. So I am going to be siding with the underdog. I'm picking Ramazan Emeev to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Brendan Allen versus Jacob Malkoun. Now, I think that this fight is going to be one that's won and lost on the mat, on the ground with the grappling. So I'm looking forward to this fight. A lot of people that have followed my podcast and what I do for years know that I love these grappling exchanges. I love the BJJ wars inside the cage. And I think that Brendan Allen's just a better fighter. Even if we're looking at the striking's come on leaps and bounds for Brendan Allen. I think Brendan Allen's become a solid striker himself. I think he's a better striker than Malkoun. I think Malkoun has gotten away away with fighting predominant strikers in his last few fights and being able to work that wrestling and grappling. And he's fought his last two opponents he's fought that have got very, very huge flaws and holes within the defensive wrestling and the defensive grappling, where Malkoun, he's been getting beaten on the feet, but he's just managed to get those takedowns and secure top position. And credit to Malkoun, you know, it shows good fight IQ and it shows where he's good inside the cage. The problem is with Brendan Allen, if Brendan Allen's lighting Malkoun up on the feet, Malkoun can't really revert to that wrestling grappling, because I think Brendan Allen's a better grappler. He's a black belt, a legit black belt. Even if Brendan Allen gets put on his back, he's got good submissions off his back, and more importantly, he can either stand up or sweep and reverse off his back as well, which you can't say the same about Malkoun's last two opponents. So that's definitely an upside for Brendan Allen as well. I think it's a good fight ahead of him here, stylistically and from a skill set perspective. So I'm picking Brendan Allen to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Seung Woo Choi versus Joshua Culibao. Now, I thought Seung Woo Choi pre-tape was going to absolutely steamroll Joshua Culibao, but actually watching Joshua Culibao's tape back, I think he's a little bit deceiving. I think he's better than what a lot of people give him credit for. Especially that fight with Charles Jourdain, you know, he had a good showing in that fight. Obviously, last time out, it was a short notice opponent, that opponent stepping up a weight class as well. A little bit how Culibao made it into the UFC fighting Jalen Turner, but Culibao's better than what I gave him credit for sure, and I really like Charles Jourdain, so that was an eye-opener here. But I do think that even though Seung Woo Choi is coming off a loss against Alex Caceres, you go and watch that fight back, Seung Woo Choi dropped Caceres in the first round, he was lighting him up, and obviously he had that point deduction as well, which is unfortunate. So the first round, in my opinion, was a draw, but then Seung Woo Choi, I think coming into the second round, by the way, having lost a point in the first round, was like a minus 800 favourite on the live betting line, which tells you everything you need to know. I've always been a fan of Seung Woo Choi. Again, you go back to the podcast where I've been breaking his fights down and analysing his fights. I love Sting. I think he's a great fighter. His striking is on point. It's clean, it's crisp, it's sharp down the middle. He's very big for the division. He's also got good cardio. His wrestling and his grappling was always his weakness, but he looks like he's worked on that. His defensive wrestling's good. He's actually shooting takedowns himself in some of his fights as well, and he can get back up to his feet if he is taken down. Now, Joshua Culibao isn't a relentless wrestler. He might shoot some takedowns here, but I think Choi's either going to be able to stuff them or stand right back up again, enough to put Culibao from making a relentless wrestling approach in this fight, and that's not normally his style anyway. I think the fight's going to be won and lost on the feet. I think Culibao is tough. I think he's durable. I think he's aggressive. He's got heart. He comes forward. He's going to make this fight more difficult for Choi than I originally thought, but I still think that Seung Woo Choi is going to be able to land his crisp combinations, is going to be the better striker, and he's just going to look great over 3 rounds, and he could potentially find a finish along the way as well, because he does have that sneaky deceptive power. I'm picking Seung Woo Choi to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Maheshate, the newcomer, versus Steve Garcia. Now, Maheshate is a very, very interesting prospect, 22 years old. This kid is young. This kid is developing from China. The only issue that I've got with Maheshate is there's not too much tape out on there. Luckily, he did go to 3 rounds in the Dana White Contender Series fight, which does give you a very good idea of how good this young kid is, because I do think that he's a legitimate prospect. But then, outside of that Contender Series tape, the only other fight that I've been able to watch was a fight where he was completely wrestled and grappled in his first fight in MMA. And that's something that you didn't see in that Contender Series fight. It was a striking war. We didn't see takedowns. We didn't see Maheshate having to defend a takedown, getting back up to his feet. The only thing we've seen from him is his very first fight in MMA, which how much stock can you really put into that? And it was against a solid Russian that only wanted to take him down and hold him down. Maheshate was actually standing back up against the Russian from time to time. So even though it was his first MMA fight and it was a long time ago, you can see that he's got some sort of get-up game, so you can only assume that he's developed and improved since that fight. But the problem is he just kept on getting taken down, and that was the problem in that fight, and that's why he lost. But I do think against Steve Garcia, that's where the only worry is, because Steve Garcia, in his last fight against Charlie Ontiveros, you saw that Garcia had to resort to wrestling and grappling, which enabled him to win the fight. So that's where there's a little bit of hesitancy here with Maheshate. But I do think that Maheshate has got the biggest gap in skill in this fight with the striking. I mean, Charlie Ontiveros, no disrespect to him, but he was absolutely lighting Steve Garcia up. And Ontiveros is a decent striker, but you look at Maheshate, he's a more aggressive striker, power, combinations. So if Steve Garcia was getting lit up there, I think he's going to get lit up here. I think Garcia is going to need his wrestling and grappling. That's where the fight could potentially be made quite close. But outside of that, I think Maheshate's got a good chance of finishing Steve Garcia early in this fight just because he's aggressive, and Steve Garcia is going to have a tough time trying to shoot takedowns on Maheshate if he's fighting on the back foot as well. That's something to take into consideration. But I like this young kid with Maheshate. I think that he will have developed from the last time that we saw him having to defend takedowns and get back up to his feet. I think he's going to be a fighter that has got a relatively high ceiling. I'm interested to see how high he goes, but in this fight against Steve Garcia, I think mind your P's and Q's with the wrestling and make sure you can get back up to your feet. But outside of that, I think it's a fight for Maheshate to lose, and for that reason, I'm picking Maheshate to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jake Matthews versus Andre Fialho, who Andre Fialho seems to be going for some sort of record in 2022 for the amount of times he can step inside a cage in a single year. We've seen him so many times. He's looking confident. He's got power in his hands. There is a few question marks on Fialho in regards to what he's looking like against a certain level of competition. Like against Cameron Van Camp, he did finish Cameron Van Camp, but Cameron Van Camp as a wrestler and grappler himself was doing well on the feet against Andre Fialho. He clipped Fialho at one point as well, but then Van Camp just made the mistake of rushing in, getting caught and getting knocked out. Now with Jake Matthews is always been that fighter that is so up and down. You don't know what Jake Matthews you're going to see inside the fight. One fight he could look great, the next fight he can look flat, then one fight he could look like he's got great finishing ability, the next fight he's looking like he's just sailing to a decision. It's really difficult to read what Jake Matthews you're going to get. But here with Andre Fialho, I kind of think that with Fialho, if he doesn't knock Jake Matthews out, then I'm not sure he's going to be able to do enough throughout the rounds, over 3 rounds, to be able to take this fight on points. Even if Matthews doesn't shoot a takedown, and this is the thing, Matthews, in my opinion, has got the wrestling and grappling advantage here, but even if he doesn't shoot the takedowns, he's got a decent point scoring style in regards to his striking ability, just keeping things simple, fundamentals. So I think unless Fialho knocks Matthews out, which Matthews hasn't, he hasn't been knocked out too many times and he's durable, I think unless Fialho knocks him out, I think that Matthews is going to be okay here on the feet. But then you add the wrestling and the grappling into that scenario as well, and I think that Fialho can be taken down. He's not got a bad get-up game, but I think that the jiu-jitsu of Matthews could be enough to keep him down. I think that Jake Matthews is going to have a decent fight ahead of him here. Like I say, just mind your P's and Q's, stay out the way of that bomb of getting knocked out from Fialho. But like I said, it's not something that we see from Jake Matthews in regards to durability issues. So I am actually going to side with the underdog here in Jake Matthews. I think he could point himself to a decision, but then you add your wrestling and grappling involved in that as well. And I think that stylistically, it becomes more of a problem for Fialho than Fialho causing a problem for Matthews. So I'm picking Jake Matthews to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Kang versus Danaa. And this is going to be a good fight, clash of styles as well. Danaa is a solid striker. Kang's a good striker himself as well. And Kang's also got decent wrestling, got decent topside control. He's got away with a couple of fights just by scoring takedowns and laying heavy on top. Now, as an underdog, I really looked to Kang in this fight, but I feel that the more I watched of Kang, there was some hesitancy on my side. And then when I watched Danaa, after I watched the Kang analysis, the Kang tape, I feel that Danaa is just going to be a problem here. Like, Kang's going to need takedowns, in my opinion, and I just don't think he's going to get takedowns regularly, or at least I don't think he's going to shoot as regularly as he should. Like, we've seen him some fights against Brandon Davis. There was times where I was thinking, you're getting lit up, shoot Kang, and he just wasn't. Obviously, he did score a few takedowns in that fight, but he wasn't shooting in the moments that I thought he should have been shooting in. And against Danaa, I think Kang's going to be relatively competitive on the feet, but every time I think Kang steps into strike, Kang's hittable, he gets hit a lot, he keeps his head on the centre line. I think Danaa, the biggest gap in skill is on the feet striking. I think Danaa's dangerous, he's sharp, he's crisp, he's going to be able to light Kang up, he's going to have to force Kang to shoot takedowns. I think Kang might be able to get a couple of takedowns, but I don't think it's going to be enough and have significant enough action on the mat to be able to make this fight won and lost with what Kang's doing in those wrestling and grappling scenarios, which leads you back to Batgerel Danaa. I know Danaa lost his last fight, but he was doing really well against Chris Gutierrez until he just got caught by the spin back fist. You know, it happens. I think stylistically, Kang's going to have some issues here. I think Kang's going to have his moments, but the moments aren't going to be significant enough for him to win the fight. I'm picking Batgerel Danaa to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Silvana Gomez-Juarez versus Na Liang. And I think this is going to be a really close fight. I like Na Liang. I said it before a UFC debut when I broke a fight down. I was a little disappointed and left underwhelmed with a performance against Ariane Carnelossi, because I did think that was a good fight for Na Liang to really express herself and show the world, the UFC fans, what she's good at. And I think it's going to be a really close fight here. I think that Na Liang's going to have her moments. I think Silvana Gomez-Juarez is going to have her moments as well. Gomez-Juarez has got power. We saw that in the last fight, but then her decision-making is questionable because she got tapped out with an armbar shortly after having a brutal knockdown. So I think that Gomez-Juarez has got something about her. She's got decent boxing. I've said that before. And from an all-round perspective, her game's okay. She's got decent wrestling, decent jiu-jitsu. But I think Na Liang, this is a fight where she can come in and express herself here, because she can't really be standing with Gomez-Juarez. Gomez-Juarez, for as well-rounded as she is predominantly a striker with that boxing style. So someone like Na Liang, I feel, could go straight underneath of the takedowns of the sharp hands from Gomez-Juarez and take her down. I think it's going to be a close fight. I think it's going to be one where if it does go to a decision, we're going to be sat there at the end of it thinking, well, this could go either way. So for that reason, I'm going to side with the underdog. I'm picking Na Liang to win this fight. And in the next fight, the final fight of this breakdown, we've got Jocelyn Edwards versus Ramona Pascual. I think that this fight, again, is going to be another close fight. Jocelyn Edwards, I think, is the better striker here. She's a little bit sharper. She's got slightly better technique. But Ramona Pascual, I think that she's got decent takedowns, although she looks more a predominant striker herself. I think in this fight, if any fighter is going to be shooting for the takedowns, looking for the wrestling and jiu-jitsu, then that's going to be on the side of Ramona Pascual. And Jocelyn Edwards has been really hit and miss here. In some fights, she's looked like she's got decent takedown defense. She can spring right back up to her feet. But then in other fights, she's looked like she can get settled on her back, like she can get a little bit stuck. And I think Pascual, there's an opportunity there for her. But I do believe that this fight is going to be won and lost on the feet. There could be moments with that wrestling and grappling, but I don't think it's going to be significant enough to have this fight won and lost in those areas. So for that reason, I do think the fight's won and lost on the feet. That's where I think that Jocelyn Edwards is just slightly better than Ramona Pascual in regards to that technique, in regards to the point scoring style and piecing combinations together, and just a varying approach to her attacks, using her legs, using her punches, mixing to the legs, body and head as well. So for those reasons, I am picking Jocelyn Edwards to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Moneyline. Once again, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening to the breakdowns, to the analysis. I appreciate all the likes to the videos. I appreciate all the subscriptions to our MMA Play 365 YouTube channel too. It's me that replies to the comments in the comment section. So if you want to tell me who you're betting on, if you want to tell me your breakdowns and your predictions, feel free. We'll have a conversation. I will always make time to get back to you. If you are betting on Saturday night, then I wish you the best of luck. Smash the bookies. Thank you for listening. I'm Newsome. We'll see you again next week.